In this episode of Why Authors Write, I am thrilled to welcome Christopher Castellani, the award-winning, gifted, and all-around amazing author of 6 books so far. His just published Last Scene, which is a dark and gripping and unforgettable story. And before that, his leading men, taking the reader to a very different place in the centering on the relationship of Tennessee Williams and Frank Merlo, starting in the 1950s in the film and high life literary circles and finding its way to the lonely and early death of Frank in a New York hospital cancer ward. Both incredible books, often heartbreaking, but so worth reading. And Chris, thanks so much for joining us to talk about why you wrote them.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's so kind of you to say all of that. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be able to talk with you today.
And I'm going to start out because it is your just published, most recent, and presumably top of mind novel right now. Uh,
hmm
Again, foreshadowing a little bit that this book starts with the tragic and premature and really incredibly sad death of
hmm
one of the leading characters, then goes on to introduce us pretty quickly to the fact that there are 4 young men cut off in their prime
hmm
who have perhaps something in common in the way they died. So, my first question, there is a question here. How did this story get a grip on you? What is the
Mm,
backstory?
yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for saying all of that. I did not know before I started writing this book that it would look the way that it does, in this unique kind of mosaic structure, in the kind of high concept telling of the story um, from the beyond, these 4 young men telling their stories, from after their deaths as they're in this kind of purgatorial space, able to communicate with each other and also able to connect in certain ways with, the person that with which they had the most intense, love relationship, when they were alive, um, and or that it would, move into the kind of near speculative future, into the 2030s. I really knew none of that when I first started. I really got caught up in the stories of, these young college age men who were supposedly the victims of this roving band of serial killers called the Smiley Face Killers. I went down the rabbit hole, looking at reading all sorts of things about um, this supposed group. Um, and the theory about this group is that they're going around targeting these young men and killing them and depositing them in these icy rivers all across New England and the upper Midwest. But it's been debunked over and over and over again. And yet there keep being these cases, these mysterious cases of these young men, most of whom have a kind of similar profile. They kind of look alike. They have in many cases similar backgrounds, and there are enough unexplained cases, that it keeps this, um, mystery alive as to what happened to many of them. So I really got caught up in their lives. I did a lot of research on there, more than 50 of them, more than 50 cases of them, if not more by now. But I really didn't know how I was going to tell the story or who would tell the story. I just kind of lived in their worlds for a while. And I tried to tell it, quote unquote, straight at first in my early drafts. They were much more traditional. Not that I was ever trying to write a traditional true crime or a traditional mystery, but the first drafts leaned more in that direction and were a bit more linear and a bit more kind of, um, expected, maybe. But actually, I was very frustrated about the fact that it wasn't really working for me because it just it wasn't coming together in the way that I thought the stories deserved. And so I kind of set it aside for a while, but it stayed with me, and the stories of these guys stayed with me. And then it sounds, kind of woo woo, but I kind of heard a voice that said to me, I am one of those boys they keep finding in the river. And I just followed that voice. And he became the first character that you meet, whose voice you hear, Matthew. And then this is again going to sound a little wacky, but he kind of introduced me to to his friends that he was making in this purgatorial afterlife, and I really just followed their stories. And I don't plan, I don't outline, I don't think, oh, now I need this type of character, now I need that type of character. I really just followed my instincts and followed what the characters were telling me organically as I was writing
Well, thank you for that.
this.
And I'm going to ask just a follow-up question because
Please.
was there any point where you felt it was getting too dark or that you wanted to stop and had to re-energize yourself? I was struck by there was humor there for sure.
Yes. Hmm.
And it was particularly funny. There was humor when they were dissing all the other dead bodies.
Right.
Who
Right.
I mean, maybe that says more about me than your writing, Chris, but I just thought that was a hilarious
Hmm.
interval. But that
Hmm.
was about the only one. What were your stopping points, starting points? How did it play out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, this was not a book in which once I was in it, I was struggling. Like, I really, the voices, once I started doing it and once I met all the people, I, it, it came pretty relatively quickly for me, a few years, 2 or 3 years it took. And I actually found the voices entertaining, in the sense of that they were making me laugh, they were making me they were challenging me, they were surprising me. I would come home and I would say to my partner, "Are these guys? They're lying. I think they're lying to me, And I would just kind of be like, what are they doing? What are they trying to, you know, like, what are they trying to tell me, and what are they trying to say about themselves that they kind of feel like they can't say?" So I really went to my point is I went every day. I left every writing session surprised and intrigued by what was going on. And so I hope that that sort of surprise comes through in the reading experience. One of my readers, um, one of my well, actually, it was my editor who read the first one of the early drafts, and he said it's kind of like all these little mysteries everywhere. Like, how is this all fitting together? Who's telling the truth? Who can I believe? What does it all add up to? All these sorts of things around this overarching, mystery. It's also, in some sense, an anti-mystery, right? Because even though it has this kind of these true crime elements and these thriller elements, it's not a traditional mystery or true crime or thriller. It's really ultimately about the relationships between these characters and their loved ones, and the love that they all had for each other in certain, to varying degrees. And it's, I think, that kind of re those kinds of authentic, complex relationships, exploring those is what kept me coming back to it, and I didn't worry that it was too dark, because I really think that again, ultimately, especially the ending, the last movements have a kind of, I think, a kind of hopeful or redemptive kind of feel to them. And so I didn't and I didn't feel like, I hope that that won't I hope that will counterbalance that, plus the love relationships will kind of counterbalance some of the more darker elements of human nature and of the some of the violence that takes place in the book.
And for this reader, that was
Mhm.
certainly true. I just
Me too.
loved each
Mhm.
of these young men in turn. I wasn't sure where the truth was, if
Yeah,
anywhere, in
yeah,
any of those stories, but they
yeah.
were all powerful and real at the time they
Mhm.
were being revealed in the book.
Really, it was all kind of a metaphor of just how we all construct ourselves, like for ourselves, for each other, for the people we love, the way we all kind of compartmentalize, and how even and I also was sort of saying something that even when all is lost, like even when, these guys are dead, right? There's nothing left to lose in a sense, and yet they're still kind of still their egos are, compelling them to say or do one thing or another. Still, they're trying to build themselves up. Some more than others are, self-deprecating. Others are building themselves up. Like I was kind of trying to give a little bit of a variety of ways in which people, men and young men in particular, and men in general, um, uh, do that. And also, I was trying to say something about men's kind of inability or difficulty to communicate with the people they love, to express what they want to, what they might want to express, but feel like the our culture sort of doesn't value in the way that they express themselves, and actually how much more easily men can express themselves and their emotions in coded ways with each other in this kind of fraternity,
Mhm.
than they can to you know their families, their love, their romantic partners, etc. So
Yes, and
mhm,
you did really set that up beautifully in that
mhm,
dialogue, that funny dialogue at the beginning.
mhm.
One more thing, just
Yeah,
when you finished
please.
writing, I'm always curious about,
Mhm.
did you feel good closure? Did you feel you were ready to say goodbye to this book, celebratory? How did it feel?
Well, it's interesting. I did have a final draft that, like, when I wrote what I thought was the final draft, I thought, yes, like I've done all that I wanted to do with this book, even though I love these characters, and even though there's a lot of material that I leave out for a lot of these characters, there's so many gaps in time and in experience for the young men, and for their loved ones. It still felt like there was enough in the book, to really get a sense of it. And that is also, I wanted to give people a taste of each of them, and not their whole life stories. Um, but when I gave it to readers, the consistent feedback was that we needed something kind of in the beginning and at the end, to or having a kind of character throughout that kind of was the spine of the book, and that, like, because before it was even more, if you can believe it, even more jumbled and even more of a mosaic. And readers were just said to me, you have to give us a kind of control line. Start with a character in the present day, and then, if possible, end with that character. And so that's where this character of James comes in, and he's kind of an avatar for, in a way, there's parts of him that are like me in the sense that he gets very caught up in the trying to figure out what happened to these young men, and all of this. But in every other way, he was not like me. But he kind of becomes the spine. And then also in the original draft, um, I don't think this spoils an ending, but um, the in this version, we hear from each of the young men at the end, and in the original version, we did not. They just kind of disappeared, and I thought, oh, that's kind of a cool way that the book could work, because the boys just disappear, but and then you don't hear from them again. But that's actually not very satisfying, I think, as a reader. So I think that was a very good feedback that I got, and once I got that feedback, then I felt like, okay, it's done.
Um, Moving into a different frame here, one of the things that you have said in another interview is that you never outline or try to impose themes
Hmm.
or devices or structures on your
Hmm.
novels.
Hmm.
And so you've shared with us now how that worked out for you in Last Scene, and how, you did at the end add to your final version this through line, which
Hmm.
didn't feel like an imposition. It felt like a closure.
Good, good.
And how did that work for you in Leading Men? Did you
Hmm.
start de novo? I'd like to write about this period of time with Tennessee William and Frank Merlo,
Hmm.
and what happened to them. Tell us.
Sure. That was a about a 20-year process, leading men. So, in the sense that I came upon um, Frank, I learned about who Frank Merlo was in the late 90s from reading a kind of a dishy biography of Tennessee Williams. And in the middle of this volume of, it's again very kind of gossipy and catty, like biography of him, there was this story of Williams not visiting his partner of many years, uh, when he was dying of cancer at the age of 40, and I learned that his partner was a working class Italian American man from New Jersey, and I am a working class Italian American man from Delaware, and I felt this sort of immediate kind of kinship with him, and a kind of surprise that someone um, like him ended up in this sort of world of the glitterati. And the more I learned about him, the more I learned how central he was to Williams's process. Not that he was a muse for him, but that he stabilized their lives in a way so that Williams could do his greatest work. And while they were together for 15 years or so, that was the period in which Williams wrote his all his great, the majority of his great plays. And then after Frank died, he never had another big hit, even though he kept writing. And I wanted to tell that story, but I really had no idea how. And so I didn't know who should tell it. I started telling parts of it from Tennessee Williams' point of view. That didn't seem to work. I wasn't sure how much time to cover. And so in the meantime, I wrote all these other books, and books about my inspired by my parents, and then I wrote a book of essays on the craft of writing called The Art of Perspective, looking at the role of the narrator, really as a way of trying to figure out how I was going to tell leading men. So I was trying to learn from other writers about how to tell that story, and so that's kind of how I ended up with really what should have been the kind of obvious answer from the beginning, which is sort of telling Frank's story from through Frank's voice, not in first person, but in third person. And there are three essential like time zones, when Frank is dying and when their life together, and then another character who is a fictional character, who I brought in, a female character, because of how central women were to their lives, and and so with all of that, I kind of put together um, this narrative that is mostly linear, even though it does jump around in these three time zones, and that really does stay pretty place based, setting based in those spaces. I really wanted the reader to be transported to, especially to Italy, which I learned was the space in which Williams and Frank were the happiest. They had this very tumultuous relationship, but when they were in Italy together, that was where they had their kind of happiest times. And so again, like last scene, it was just kind of a process of trying something, it didn't work, trying another approach, and then as I went along, kind of thinking about what's the overall strategy of how I am getting the reader to fall in love with Frank the way I did, to mourn him the way I did, to understand the nature of their relationship, the kind of power play they had, and to see them through the lens of this other woman, who, in a sense, kind of represented the sort of many women in their lives. So, um, I did with that one, I did have to do some outlining, but only when I was kind of halfway through because of the rest of the book, because I did not want I wanted everything in the book to have I wanted it to be possible that everything in the book could have happened. So therefore, I had to make sure that if I said they were in Italy in August of 1953, that it was possible that they were in Italy at that time. And I wanted to write in the cracks of what we knew, and didn't know about their lives, and sort of fill those in, and kind of suggest that maybe all of this happened, uh, within like within the constraints of what the biographies tell us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The story seems very seamless and very true. And yet,
Hmm.
clearly, you made this deliberate decision to add Anya, this fictional,
Yes.
very
Hmm.
plausibly actress, and the
Yes.
parts where she was just incandescent with rage
Hmm.
at how
Hmm.
Tennessee Williams had abandoned Frank
Yes.
were
Yes.
They were marvelous.
Yes, thank you. Yes, because I felt a lot of that myself, and I tell people that it's true. I really didn't feel like I fully understood their relationship, Tennessee's and Frank's, or even Frank as a character until I saw him through her eyes. I think because of that objectivity, like you said, or because she came to their relationship you know, in the middle of it. And whereas the baggage of the Williams Merlot relationship almost allows like blurs what's going on, but to have someone come in on the outside and say, "Oh, this is what you're like. This is what's going on," and then have those feelings about it, it kind of stood it for me and for the reader in a way, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
And two quick questions.
Sure.
One is the missing play,
Hmm.
and did that flow beautifully for you, or was that something that was
That was
typical?
terrifying. Yeah, the idea of writing a original lost Tennessee Williams play, which I did as part of this, and it's in the book,
Right.
was very intimidating. But the only way I could get around that was, or get over that was that it was a bad Tennessee Williams play. So I felt like I could write a bad Tennessee Williams play or a play that doesn't fully work. I couldn't write like if I had tried to make it like, oh, this lost brilliant play, like there's no way I could have written that. But one thing that you may not know or that readers definitely wouldn't know is that the content of that play is actually a short story that I wrote back in 1997, right when I had first met Frank as a character. I mean, Frank as a person in the biography. I wrote a short story for a creative writing class. And what happens in that short story is I turned that short story into the bad play. And so it's just, another example of what we tell writers all the time, like don't throw anything away, right? Because you can always repurpose it. You can always use it, in some other context. And it's, always part of the DNA of the story anyway. But if you can make it a concrete piece of it and not just toss it, then, then lucky you, So I felt very lucky that I had that as a story for it.
Oh, that is super interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Hmm.
sharing that. And
Hmm.
yes, I thought that was very bold to be speaking in Tennessee Williams' voice, but also,
Hmm.
of course, it couldn't have been a brilliant undiscovered play. It would have blown up the plot of the entire novel at that point.
Exactly. That would not have worked. Yes, that would not have worked. So yeah, I was kind of happy with my decision making there to make it a bad play.
And in fact, it
Yeah,
to me it became emblematic of Tennessee Williams was broken in some way when he broke the relationship with Frank.
exactly. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it was a great emblematic way of presenting that.
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
short inside the novel.
Yes.
So,
Exactly. Which I also worried about. Like, because I know when I read books and there's stuff like that, either poems or journals or letter, I tend to not read them as carefully. And I know that, and it's because it takes you out of the world of the dream in a way, And so I really didn't want to make it too long. So that was important to me as well.
and I will just say that the death of Frank, as heartbreaking as it was truly transcendent.
Yeah, thank you. Because that was my first um, encounter with Frank was in that hospital room. The one good thing in a sense, is that there are a lot of accounts of the details of Frank's final hospital stay, not just from Williams's own memoirs, but from lots of other people, from Truman Capote, from Vivian Lee, from all these other people who went to visit him. And so I was able to use a lot of that as real, material, but I also added a bunch of things that were not, not real, but that I thought were more a way of amplifying the dynamics of their relationship. One thing I was very, very adamant about was that I wanted the very last words of the book to be Frank's. It's the actual, like, documented words. So that those final words, which I won't say here, but those final words were his, and they are the words that stuck with Williams for the rest of his life.
Right. As they should have.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
I think we're on the same page about the who was the most important character in
Oh,
Lee.
for sure. No question. No question. It really is his story. I mean, I understand when people say, oh, it's your Tennessee Williams book. I'm not going to be like, I don't say no, it's Frank Merlot's book, but if you read it, you know that it's his book and not Williams's book.
And so, of course, as we move towards wrapping up, I have to ask you about the movie
Of
because
course.
it's such an author's dream, probably especially in writing a book, to think, oh, this is the one that's going to be optioned for a movie. It's going to be
Yeah.
winning an Oscar. I'm going to be there. And it was optioned for a movie, and it's been a long time that it has been optioned. And
Yeah.
I don't want to push it, but I'd love to hear how it affected you as an author, since that
Yeah.
is such a universal dream of every
Yes.
author.
Yeah. If any writer tells you that they don't like dream about that, like they're lying to you. You know, every writer, no matter what kind of book they write, in the back of their mind they think, oh, wouldn't it be great? And they cast it in their mind and they have the little fantasy about it. So I definitely had that. And I was so incredibly uh grateful and stunned when I learned that it was at first Luca Guadagnino and Peter Spears, who made Call Me by Your Name, who optioned the book. I had this incredible Zoom conversation like this with them when they first contacted me about it, and we really understood the book and really wanted to do right by it, and especially do right by Frank. Like they shared our appreciation for Frank, and but that was 2019, and then there was a writer's well, sorry, then there was COVID, and then there was a writer's strike, and then they had a screenwriter, and they had a script that the screenwriter had written that they were going to use, but then ultimately they decided they did not want to use, and so they kept re-optioning and optioning the 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 rights, which is terrific, but and it's still and it is still going. And they have just hired a new screenwriter, and the screenwriter is writing it for two specific actors, but I can't say who they are, but they're really good. So, and I'm really excited about it. And then the way it affected me is, it I can't lie. I'm not going to lie and say that it didn't make me feel, proud and excited, and it made me, walk a little taller, in terms of just the fact, because it's the ultimate compliment that someone would take something that you created out of nothing essentially and make another piece of art from it that they could share with in this glamorous way with the whole world, and I think that to me that's just the highest compliment is someone taking something you made and doing something else with it. And I, from the beginning, recognized, because I have friends who have had this happen to them, and what they said was, like, you really do have to give it up. Like, it is not, they really are taking it from you and making something else. It's not the thing that you made. And so I really had that attitude from the beginning. Like, I trusted them, and I still trust them to do right by it in the way that they're going to do. And I'm not really involved in the creation of it, though I am in communication with them. And so it's just really just like I'm enjoying it the way that anyone would enjoy wanting to see the movie of a book that they love, Like, so I wonder how they're gonna do it, that kind of feeling. And I think that's the healthiest way. And the last thing I'll say is that producer Peter, who is really, really a mensch, like he's a Hollywood guy, but he's also a real guy. Like he's a straight shooter. And the first thing he said to me is that my best advice to you is to forget this is happening and work on your next project, And it's exactly what I did and tried to do. And he was right. He said, he's like, I'm telling you this is going to happen. It may take 10 years, it may take 15 years. He's like, but it's going to happen. And in the meantime, work on something else. So that's what got us here today, I guess.
Well, that's wonderful perspective. And
Mhm.
look what came out of that. The last
Exactly.
scene book,
Mm.
maybe that will be a movie first. Who knows? And you've led up to my very last question,
Mhm.
which is on your
Mm.
website. It says there is another novel in
Mhm.
progress.
Mhm.
Mamissimo would be
Yes.
the title. That maybe
Yes.
is not going to be the title. And
Right.
how is that in your own life process and writing process, Chris? That does it help you when you're like in the throes of finishing up one book to be thinking of another, or how does that work for
Yeah,
you?
definitely. After I finished Leading Men was the only time I didn't already know what the next book was going to be, right? So, and it was terrifying. Like with my all my other books, I knew the next project before I finished the one I was working on, and I could hear it kind of calling to me, And so, but with with after Leading Men, I really didn't know what I was doing or what I was going to do, and it was really, really hard. It's hard enough to write a book, but when you're not 100% sure that you should be writing the book you're writing, like that is the worst feeling. So that's why I kind of set Last Scene aside, was because I really wasn't sure that I should be writing it. It wasn't coming together. These thriller elements, mystery elements didn't feel like me. So I thought, what am I doing? And a friend of mine suggested to write a kind of coming of age novel inspired by my own, like a comic coming of age novel inspired by my own life. Which is I have a very not exciting life, so I thought that doesn't sound like all that great. But he kind of helped me frame it around this idea of the so the word mamismo refers to the phenomenon of Italian mama's boys, right? So it's these men who will not move out of their mother's houses in Italy. And they want their mothers to take care of them forever. They're not getting married. They're having, relationships, but their mothers still cook for them and do their laundry, and they live at home rent free. And it's this kind of like codependent relationship where, the mothers don't want them to leave and the sons don't want their mothers to take care of them anymore. So I wanted to write a sort of comic version of or funny novel that that stars a mamone, they're called a mama's boy, and draw heavily from my own experience. So I have a lot of that. I have about 200 pages of that. So once this all settles down, I'm going to go back to that in earnest and see what happens. But it would be another kind of shift in my tone, from historical fiction to this kind of whatever Last Scene, however you'd categorize it, which you sort of can't, and then this kind of more comic novel. So we'll see.
Well, I already know that it will be unforgettable and that the characters that you create won't be you. Even
Right.
if they're based on partly on your experience, they'll be something completely different and unexpected.
Thank
So
you. That's
again,
kind.
thank you so much for sharing the backstory of Last Scene, the stops and starts, and the way it came out, including the through line in the final draft, and uh, giving us an inside look at leading men and a very provocative and exciting glimpse into the next novel from Christopher Castellani. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's really a pleasure to talk to you.